She was my maid of honor. She was also sleeping with my husband. I'm going to tell this story in order, because the order matters. Because if I had known the end first, I would never have believed any of the middle. Her name is Jess. We met at 22, first year of a graduate program in Boston. She was the first person who talked to me in the orientation week when I knew absolutely no one, sat down next to me at a lunch table with her tray, and said, "You look like you also don't know a single person here." And that was that. 9 years of friendship. The kind that becomes so interwoven with your daily life that you stop being able to see the seams. She was in my wedding party, obviously. She was the maid of honor. She gave a speech that made half the room cry. She talked about the kind of friend I was, about how I showed up for people, about how my husband, his name is Tom, was the luckiest man in the room. She helped me pick the venue. She threw the bachelorette weekend. She held my hand in the car on the way to the ceremony when I was shaking with nerves, and she said, "You're going to be so happy." I want you to hold that image for a moment, because I come back to it constantly. The car, her hand on mine, those words. The marriage was 2 years old when I started noticing things. Small things first. Tom's phone face down more often than usual. A slight lag in his responses when I asked about his day, just a fraction of a second. Barely perceptible. The way he'd sometimes come home from a work happy hour smelling like a bar he said had been crowded and loud, but with a particular cologne scent underneath. A woman's cologne. Not mine. I told myself I was being paranoid. Told myself that 2 years in, with the stress of our jobs and the new mortgage, a little distance was normal. Told myself I was the kind of person who manufactured suspicion because I was afraid of happiness. I even told Jess. We had dinner one Thursday, just the two of us, and I told her I'd been feeling uneasy, that something felt slightly off with Tom, that I couldn't name it. She listened. She poured me more wine. She said, "Tom adores you. I see it every time I'm around you, too. Don't let anxiety steal something good from you." I believed her. Because why wouldn't I? Because she was Jess. I found out 6 weeks later, not through a text I wasn't supposed to see, not through a friend tip, through a photograph. I was looking for a specific photo on Tom's laptop, a picture from our first anniversary trip that I wanted to print. And I found a folder I hadn't seen before. Mislabeled. The kind of mislabeling that's either very careless or a specific kind of arrogance, the belief that you won't be caught. The folder had 47 photographs. I knew the location and the background of several of them. A rental house on the Oregon coast, the kind of place you book for a weekend. Tom had told me he'd gone there with colleagues for a team off-site. I hadn't thought to question it. The woman in the photographs was Jess. I sat at his desk and I looked at 47 photographs, all the way through. I don't know why. I think some part of me needed the full scale of it, needed to understand not just that it was happening, but how long, how far, how real. The timestamp spanned 14 months. 14 months. Which meant it had started 4 months before our wedding. Which meant the bachelorette weekend. The speech. The car. Her hand on mine. You're going to be so happy. All of it happening simultaneously with this. I closed the laptop. I went to the kitchen. I made tea. And I stood at the counter and drank it while I decided what I was going to do. I did not call Jess. I did not confront Tom that night. I called my sister, who lives in Seattle and who I trust completely, and I told her everything. She drove to Portland the next morning. With her there, I called a divorce lawyer. Same day, the lawyer asked me the practical questions. Shared assets, mortgage length of marriage. Oregon is an equitable distribution state. 2 years of marriage with a shared mortgage. I had a strong position. "Do you want to preserve the marriage?" the lawyer asked. I thought about it for exactly 1 second. "No," I said. I told Tom the following Sunday. I had waited a week, not because I was uncertain, but because I wanted to be prepared. I wanted to sit down at that table with everything organized. No hysteria, no performance. Just facts. I opened the laptop. I showed him the folder. I told him what I knew and when I had found out. I told him I had already spoken to a lawyer. I told him he had 2 weeks to make arrangements. He cried. He said it was over. He said it had been a mistake from the beginning. He said he was sorry in about 14 different ways. I let him finish. Then I asked one question. Did she know about the wedding? Was it already happening when she gave that speech? He didn't answer immediately, which was its own answer. Yes, he said finally. I nodded. I stood up, and I went to our bedroom and closed the door. I have not spoken to Jess since. She called 11 times in the 2 weeks after Tom moved out. She texted she left a voicemail that was 7 minutes long. I listened to it once. She said she was sorry. She said she hadn't known how to stop. I deleted it. People have asked me since, don't you want to know why? Don't you want the explanation? The full story? No. There is no explanation that rearranges those 47 photographs. There is no context that changes the car. Her hand. Those words, what I know, is enough. What I know is more than I needed. The divorce was finalized 8 months after I found the folder. I kept the house. Tom moved to Seattle, which has a certain symmetry since my sister is there and now I have reason to visit more. I'm 33 now. I live alone in the house we bought together. I've repainted 2 rooms. I have a dog, a rescue greyhound named Milo who is deeply dignified and slightly neurotic, and who sleeps at the foot of my bed and has never once let me down. I think about the 9 years with Jess sometimes. All the real things that were in it. The real laughter, the real support, the time she showed up when I needed someone. I don't know what to do with those memories. They don't stop being real just because the person was also capable of this. People aren't simple enough for that. Maybe that's the most uncomfortable part, not the betrayal itself. But the fact that the friendship was also real, and both things were true at the same time.
My boss took credit for my work for 3 years. I waited for exactly the right moment. Patience is not a natural trait for me. I want to be upfront about that. I am by nature someone who acts quickly, who sees a problem and moves toward it immediately. Sitting still when something is wrong goes against everything in my instincts. But sometimes, the right move is to wait. And in 3 years of working under a man named Richard Holt, I learned more about strategic patience than I ever wanted to know. I joined the company, a mid-sized financial software firm in Chicago, at 26, junior analyst position. Richard was my direct manager. He had been there 12 years. He was well liked by senior leadership, good at politics, and I understood this fairly quickly, not particularly strong technically. He was a manager in the truest sense, someone who managed people rather than doing the work himself. This would have been fine. Managers don't need to be the most technically skilled person in the room. What is not fine is what Richard did instead. The first time it happened, I didn't fully register it. I had built an analysis, a risk modeling framework for a specific client segment, that took me about 3 weeks. Richard had asked for it. I had delivered it. He had presented it to the senior team. In the meeting notes that circulated afterward, the framework was attributed to him. Not developed by the team, not built by Eric. My name was Eric. Just presented as his work, his insight. I mentioned it to him afterward. Casually, not accusatory, I genuinely thought it might have been a clerical oversight. He looked at me with the patient expression of a man explaining something obvious. In this company, deliverables from your team reflect on you as manager. Senior leadership understands that the work comes from the team. That's how it works. I nodded, and I filed it away. The second time, 6 months later, a client presentation I had built almost entirely alone was delivered by Richard to the executive committee. The deck had my name on it in the file properties, standard metadata. Richard had removed it before sending. I checked. The third time, and this is where it moved from irritating to something more serious, Richard presented a methodology I had developed to a potential client. The client asked who had built it. Richard said, "I've been developing this approach for the past year." I sat across the table and I heard him say those words, and I felt something shift in me, something go very quiet and very cold. I had been in that company for 2 years. I had produced by any reasonable measure most of the analytical work that Richard's team was known for. My name appeared on almost none of it externally. My performance reviews were good but carefully written, praising my contribution to the team without ever specifying what that contribution was. I was being kept in a box. Useful inside it, invisible outside it. I started documenting everything. Every analysis, I kept a private copy with timestamps showing my authorship. Every presentation, screenshots of the original file properties before Richard's edits. Every meeting where my work was presented, I kept notes. Dates, content, what was said, who was in the room. I did this for a year, while continuing to work at exactly the same level, while giving Richard no reason to think anything had changed. While waiting, what I was waiting for was an opportunity. Not to blow things up, I was too careful for that, but to be seen by the right person in an undeniable way. The opportunity came in the form of a company all-hands meeting, a strategic planning session where senior leadership, including the CEO and 2 board members, were present. Richard was going to present the new client acquisition framework, my framework, built over 4 months. 2 days before the meeting, Richard got sick. Not strategically, actually sick. A respiratory infection that his doctor told him would make speaking difficult. He called me, told me he needed me to present in his place, to present his work. The night before the presentation, I made some changes to the deck. Nothing dramatic. I added a slide at the beginning, a methodology overview that explained the framework's development process in detail, with the original file dates, with citations to the internal memos I had written, with my name, clearly, as the author of the underlying analysis. I didn't announce this in advance. I just presented the work accurately. The CEO, a woman named Patricia who I had spoken to approximately twice in 3 years, asked a question 20 minutes in, a technical question about the modeling assumptions, the kind of question only someone who had built the thing could answer cleanly. I answered it in detail. She asked a follow-up. I answered that too. And then a third question. Afterward, she came up to me. "You built this," she said. It wasn't a question. "Yes," I said. "How long have you been on the team?" 3 years, I said. She looked at me for a moment. The look of someone doing arithmetic. "I'd like to have a conversation with you next week," she said. "Not with Richard, with you." Richard found out what had happened within 24 hours. He called me, still sick, voice rough, and he was angry in the careful way of someone who knows they can't be openly angry. He said the slide I'd added wasn't appropriate, that I had gone outside my lane. That attribution in presentations was a management decision. I let him finish. Then I said, "Richard, I have 3 years of documentation, timestamps, file metadata, original drafts. I have said nothing to anyone, but I presented my work accurately to the CEO and she asked to meet with me. I think we both know where this is going. I'd rather it go there cleanly." "What do you want?" he asked. I had thought about this carefully. "A transfer to the strategy team," I said, "reporting directly to Patricia. A title that reflects what I actually do. And nothing else. No formal complaint, no HR process, no documentation shared with anyone. Just, let me out of the box." The transfer was approved 2 weeks later. Richard remained in his role for another year before leaving, voluntarily, officially, for a position at another firm. I don't know the full circumstances. I didn't ask. I've been on the strategy team for 2 years now. My name is on my work. Patricia mentioned me by name in the last all-company meeting. The documentation I kept. I've never used it, never needed to, but I still have it. I kept it because I learned something in those 3 years that I want to always remember. The work is the proof. You don't need to announce what you built. You just need to be in the room, the right room, when someone asks the question that only you can answer.
My father had a second family. They didn't know we existed either. I want to start with what I knew about my father before any of this happened. His name was Robert. He and my mother divorced when I was 7. Not dramatically, not with fighting, just with the slow mutual recognition that they had built a life that neither of them actually wanted. My mother moved us, me and my younger brother Will, to Cincinnati. My father stayed in Columbus, 3 hours away, which in the geography of divorced families is either close enough to maintain something real or far enough to let things slide. With us, it slid. Not completely. He called. Birthdays. Occasional weekends that I remember as a series of slightly awkward lunches and afternoons that ended with him dropping us at my grandmother's house looking relieved. He paid child support on time. He came to my high school graduation. He sent a card when I got into college. He was present in the way that some absent fathers are present, just enough to not be completely absent. A ghost with a phone number. I am 35 now. My father died 18 months ago. Heart failure, 62 years old, a Sunday morning in November. My mother called me. I drove to Columbus. I handled the arrangements with Will. We held a small service. At the service, there were people I didn't know. This wasn't unusual. My father had a life I wasn't particularly involved in. Colleagues, neighbors, people from whatever world he'd built after us. But there was a woman there, mid-40s, dark hair, very composed, who sat in the third row with two teenagers beside her, a boy and a girl, maybe 16 and 14. They sat very still and very straight, the way people sit at funerals when they are trying very hard to hold it together. I noticed her the way you notice things at funerals, peripherally in the spaces between the larger grief. I assumed she was a coworker or a neighbor, someone from a part of his life I didn't know. After the service, she came up to me. She said her name was Carol. She said she was sorry for my loss. She said my father had talked about me. I thanked her. I asked how she knew him. She looked at me with an expression I couldn't read, something between carefully controlled and very tired. I was his wife, she said. We've been married for 14 years. People talking quietly. Someone putting food out on a table. The normal furniture of a post-funeral gathering. I'm sorry, I said. I don't understand. I don't think either of us is supposed to exist. From the other's perspective. Her name was Carol Meehan. She and my father had married when I was 21. The same year he'd called me to say he was seeing someone, but that it was nothing serious. The two teenagers, the ones sitting very straight in the third row, were his children. Their names were Jake and Anna, 16 and 14, my half-siblings. That I had never heard of. That had never heard of me. Not my name, not my brother Will, nothing. Carol told me this in a quiet corner of the room in about 4 minutes, efficiently, the way someone delivers information they have been preparing to deliver for a long time. He kept us completely separate, she said. I knew he had children from a previous marriage. He told me you were estranged, that you'd chosen not to have contact. I had no reason to question it. I found Will across the room. I brought him over. I introduced him to Carol and watched his face go through the same sequence mine had. We stayed for another hour, circling each other, me and Will, Carol and her children, in the strange gravitational field of shared grief over a man who had apparently managed to be two different fathers in two different cities for 14 years. Jake, the 16-year-old, came up to me near the end. He looked like my father, more than Will does. The same jaw, the same way of standing slightly too still. He talked about you, Jake said. Not by name, but sometimes he'd say, I have older kids, from before. I'd ask and he'd change the subject. What do you want to know? I asked. He thought about it. Was he a good dad? He asked. I looked at this boy, my half-brother, a stranger, my father's face, and I thought about all the awkward lunches, the birthday calls, the graduation card, the ghost with a phone number. He tried, I said, in the ways he knew how, which were limited, but he tried. Nodded like that was the answer he'd expected. Or maybe the one he'd needed. I've thought about my father differently since that afternoon. Not better, not worse, exactly. Just more completely. He was a man who couldn't hold the complexity of his own life in one place, who managed it by dividing it, by keeping things compartmentalized in ways that required constant, careful maintenance. And what that maintenance cost, not him, but everyone around him, was the knowledge of each other. Carol and I have talked 3 times since the funeral. We're not friends. I don't know if we will be, but she's a decent person in an impossible situation. And so are her kids. Will took it harder than me. He was angrier. He felt the absence more acutely, the revelation of it, the confirmation that our father's distance had been chosen, not circumstantial, that there was a version of him somewhere who had shown up, fully. Just not for us. I understand that anger. I felt it too. But I also keep thinking about Jake's question. Was he a good dad? The truth is, he was probably the same dad to all of us. A certain amount present, a certain amount absent, trying in the limited ways he had, failing in the ways that cost the most. There's no villain in this story. Or rather, there is a villain. But the villain is gone, and what he left behind is a family scattered across two cities that didn't know about each other. And now does. We're still figuring out what to do with that. Maybe that's the work, not forgiving the dead man, but deciding what to build out of what he left.